Okay, thanks for your patience, everyone. I think we'll get going now. Make sure you can see my screen there. All right, so the last webinar we did, we basically made this, we got to this point. So we're just going to continue on from there, and I'll show you some tricks and just try to generally show you the workflow of KeyShot. So looking at this, what I want to do is get the lens for this camera actually put in there. So that's gonna mean we need to worry about the scale of the lens in relation to the scale of this camera. So what I need to do is pull up my lens file. These are coming from SolidWorks. All right, let's take a look here. Camera. All right. So what I'm going to do is open up my assembly here so you can get an idea of what I need to do to make this work correctly. Okay, so in one assembly I have the body, and then I have two different lenses. You can see they're positioned correctly. So you can see which ones we have here. All right. So I needed to make this assembly, and then what I needed to do was save out individual assemblies from this one assembly of each of the individual components. Of course, I could import an entire assembly, even with with both of the lenses shown, import that whole thing into KeyShot, but then everything will be under my scene tree here as one model. So instead, we have it as separate files, and let's just go ahead and see if this file is set up correctly. All right, so I drag and drop one of my lenses. I'm going to add it to the scene, and to make sure it comes into the right position, I don't need center or snap. And then what I want to make sure is enabled is the coordinates from previous import. So just see if that works. And there we go. So now looking at our scene tree, you can see it's basically positioned exactly the way it was positioned in SolidWorks. The difference, of course, would be if I imported it and told it to use automatic coordinates. What it would do is scale this new file up or down some arbitrary amount so that it fits into a space within KeyShot that we have preset so that you're always kind of within the environment and your models come into a decent size, so they're easy to work with the cameras, and they're always right in the center. So you have to override that default behavior by making sure that, I'll show you the menu again there. Desktop, camera. When I drag and drop, I'll just bring lens 1 in as well. Drag and drop this one here. You see if this is set to automatic, it's basically just scaling by whatever makes it fit the right space. So from previous, it uses the same amount of arbitrary scale that was applied to the first model, and it applies it to the second model. You will see in a new session of KeyShot, if I drag and drop a model into here, I don't have those options. I just have center and snap. And that's because there is no previous model to scale off of, to use the same scale values from. So this, you are basically forced to use the automatic scale feature. So that automatic coordinates option is completely automatically on here for the first import. So But we have our lenses now. The nice thing about having imported these separately, and let's go ahead and get this other one in there. Importing these as separate models allows us to very quickly and easily hide and show one instead of the other, so I can switch between them. Alright, so let's just work with lens 1 for now, and I'm going to take some materials and just drop them. And sometimes when I'm working in materials, I like to go into performance mode, Alt-P, speeds things up a little bit. Let me make my screen a little bigger for you guys. There we go. Okay. So let's take a look at this material I have here. It's a plastic. This one thing I can do, I'm going to start with that. Put that over here on these grips. And actually this grip is going to be a metal, but we'll mess with that later. So instead of using the plastic here, what I might want to use instead is the translucent material. And that's going to just give it a softer look. So let's go ahead and enable translucent. I'm going to crank up the translucent transmission color. And then I'm going to bring the diffuse color up from black a little bit, because we don't want it to be too dark. And we can just maybe turn off the textures for now. Okay. Having a bit of a problem with my mouse. I think there's actually something on the sensor. I'll deal with it. Alright. So that texture I had on there was actually almost black. So that was making it dark because the texture was blending with the underlying color. So now that I have that texture removed, I can make the material overall darker. And now what I want to do with the translucent material is adjust the translucency slider. And as I increase that, you'll see it gets a softer look to it. So let's look at it from about this angle. So with the translucent material, though, you have to be careful because if you increase the translucency slider too much, it starts to have a negative impact on the look. Let's just get this. It's a subtle effect. And one area where we can really see its effect would be over here. You'll see, if I look through this thin surface, we're actually getting light scattering through that surface, as you can see there. And if I were to color the transmission, we'll get that color of scattering light. And as I increase the translucency, I get more of that coming through. So I'll just put that back over there, put a metal back here. And what I'm going to do is roughen this. So the roughness will make it look like a less shiny plastic. And I'll just let that res up for a second. And let's just turn the translucency back to white transmission there. Alright, that should give it a nice result. So now what I want to deal with is this inner part here. So maybe start, just double click here, and I'm just going to throw on a black plastic on the inner part here. Now one thing that I generally do with any material is I never use completely black, because in nature you don't get quite perfect black materials. So I say somewhere around 5 to 10, depending on the lighting. Alright, let's make this a glass, solid glass. Now, you might be curious. I'm sure you've seen the solid glass material and the glass material, and I'll go ahead and show you what the benefits of each are. Let's take a look at, for this actually, let's take a look at a new file. I think I have something here. Thick, there we go. Let's take a look. Okay, so I'm just going to center, snap. There we go. All right, so this file, I'm going to look at this. I'm going to just set this to a solid glass. I'm going to pause this other session at KeyShot. That's Shift-P. And, of course, the K button will bring up KeyShot hotkeys. So all the hotkeys I use can be found there. All right, so I have my first model here. And what you're seeing here is just a simple revolve out of SolidWorks that actually has trimmed out thickness. So you have basically that thick of a wall coming all the way down the side. So it's basically a shell there. But now I have another file. Let's call this, let's get this one here. And I'm going to add the scene, center snap, that's fine. From previous is fine. Okay, so now I have this other one called no thick. And this basically, this has one surface to represent the complete shell of the model. So now what I'm going to do is put that same material on there. And right away we notice obviously a big difference here in terms of color and refraction. But this of course is using the same exact material. So what you're seeing here is the benefit of the solid glass material. What it does is it actually has accurate color density properties. So on this material, we talk about the same material, exactly the same color, IOR, everything. But on this one, since we have surfaces that are very thin and then there's a big open space in the middle, we don't get a lot of color coming through because the color is fairly faint. And the transparency setting, which is what controls basically the density of the color in the material, is at a kind of high value for that kind of model. This is a relative thing, so it's high for this, but might be low for something else. But you can see as I decrease the transparency of the material, it's effectively packing in a more dense amount of color into the surface. So for a given surface thickness, you get more color if you have a lower transparency. You can see as I increase that, I get a more white-looking glass. If we look at this on our thick, basically this is a solid volume of glass now. If I have to increase the transparency a lot more to get rid of that color density. And so you can see, but if I lower it a lot, I get a very dense color. I understand the sound quality isn't exactly very good. Isn't too good. Yeah. Let me try this. Does it get better now that both of my KeyShot sessions are paused? I wonder if my computer's having a hard time. Oh. Well, that's not good. Okay, let's try this. I wonder, is it better with performance mode on? This might help out a little bit. Let me know. Sounds okay? Okay, excellent. We'll go ahead and close SolidWorks. That might help also. Okay. So basically, to finish off, solid glass, its biggest advantage, the solid glass material, is that it does color density in a scientifically accurate way. Let's compare this glass to the glass material. I'm going to apply the glass material to both. In fact, I'm going to shift left click on this one, and then shift control right click onto here, and that's going to paint and link these two models together. Now, when I change the color, you'll see it change together. And right now, there's a couple of things in play. I have this glass not set to even refract. So of course that's going to be completely different than the solid glass material, which you can't turn off refraction. On the glass material, to turn off refraction, you have to disable two-sided. So that's what I've done here. Enabling it, you can see it creates the accurate refractions, and we get basically the same result as the solid glass material. In fact, I can just change over to solid glass here, especially if I make it white. This will look pretty much the same, but the glass material has the ability to turn that off. So this two-sided option is very nice when you have only one surface that needs to represent a vessel of any sort, or the windshield of a car. If you look at it one surface, it allows you to create the shine and reflection of glass without the refraction. And that's especially useful for things like bottles, where if you don't have the thickness actually modeled, and you apply a solid glass material, it will look like it's a complete solid chunk of the refractive material that you apply to it. So that's one advantage towards glass, is that I can actually turn that off. It's not the most accurate thing to be able to actually not have any thickness. Of course, it's ideal to model the thickness, but if you don't have that, then at least you have something you can use to get a decent result. But let's take a look at two-sided on, so it's refracted just like the solid glass. And when I add color to this, you see that it actually has it doesn't have any idea how thick or thin these surfaces are. It has just a set amount of color for the surface. So even though this is much thinner surfaces than this, we get basically the same amount of color. And that might be something you want at times, but of course, the most accurate result is to use the solid glass. And the reason it's really nice is because you get in areas, you see in this thin area of this model, it's very dynamic. We get a lot of color here, but we get much less color here, and that's the property of the density of the color in the glass. All right, so let's go ahead and back to the file here. Audio problems, yeah. Trying to let's see if it continues with this one. Well, all right, so what we're doing is we're going to look at this glass. We're going to apply what we've just talked about to this. But let's take a look at what's inside there, because it's getting a bit crazy. All right, just going to apply the same metal to these other parts here. Okay, and down there is another glass, so I'm going to make that a lens sort of material. Just make that white. Sound quality is still bad. I wonder maybe if I make this smaller. I suppose I could, let's try calling in. Give me 1 second.
Welcome to GoToWebinar, web events made easy. Welcome to GoToWebinar, web events made easy.
What we're gonna try to do is use Ryan's laptop for audio. Let's get some power plugged in. That's actually around back, Ryan. If you want to plug that in. All right. All right, let's see. Okay, let us know how that sounds, and we'll just continue on. It's a little further away, so I might have to speak up a little more now. That's pretty good. Yeah. Okay. All right, excellent. So let's get back to it here. GoToMeeting stuff I have open. Okay. So what we're dealing with here is we have the lenses. So what I might actually do, I'm going to just deal with the lens itself. So I'm going to turn off the camera body. and we'll spin around to the back here and just make sure we get everything painted up. This surface here might make a little, just a dark sort of blackout type material. That should work nicely. Okay, so double click here, we have our solid glass just set to whites, and we're going to bring back the other glass there. Let's just get rid of these other things. Okay, and let's turn off these two. There we go. All right, so there's our glass. One thing to notice here is in performance mode, we are actually not seeing through the glass, and that's because we look at what performance mode is doing. You see performance mode here. If we look at what it's doing, actually go to real time, you can see it sets your ray bounces to 2, and it turns off detailed shadows, detailed and direct illumination. It also turns off ground shadows and ground reflections. If I turn performance mode back off, I can see through the glass now, and that's because I have my ray bounces set to a higher value. Let me turn my glass to just white there. So you can see how performance mode affects the visual of it. But those settings, of course, being off, speed things up quite a bit. All right. So that's basically the prep I want to do on the lens here. You can just maybe set this to not a glass, a plastic. So anytime I'm making a plastic, technically you want to use a white specular, and it can be anything, really just a gray specular of any sort, so a white, black, mid gray, whatever you want. And the reason for that is the only true, basically the only material that really should have a color on its specular value is going to be a metal. Plastics don't actually take on colored specular, so take that into consideration. And so, okay, just going to copy and paste that red over to here, and I might use that as a starting point here, but I'm just going to make that white. All right. Another very, very scientific sort of consideration will be Fresnel. You'll find actually some of your old materials, especially if you're coming from Hypershot, you'll have plastic materials that have this Fresnel value disabled, and they'll have their specular value set to something a little darker. It'll look something like this. But it's actually quite inaccurate to have the Fresnel value disabled. If you look at the difference here. And the reason, where you see the difference is in the edges. When I look at this reflection straight on, like so, you see it has a certain amount of shine to it, and it's much more muted than when I see this reflection towards the edges, basically at a more glancing angle from the camera. And that is the property of Fresnel in action. It says that a surface gets more reflective as it's viewed at a more glancing angle. So as you get closer to parallel with the surface, you see more reflection. But when that Fresnel value is turned off, the surface is the exact same amount of reflection no matter what angle it's viewed at. So it does not give an accurate result. And actually a lot of other rendering tools don't take that consideration into play, and you get just purely non-Fresnel materials, which is not quite so nice. All right, let's just make this, make it a dark plastic, and give it just a little bit of roughness. Cool. We'll bring back all the rest of the parts here. And we can turn off the camera body. There we go. Just bring back the camera body. All right, so now what I want to do is take a look at labels. And where I'm going to deal with that is up here on the shutter speed dial. Maybe this would be a good time to go over any questions if there's anything. Yeah, let's, if you want to point out, nothing really. Okay, yeah, if there's nothing too specific we need to go over. We'll make time at the end to answer questions. So if there's anything specific that you want to see covered, be sure to ask the question into the questions box there, and if it's one that seems very useful to everyone, we'll make sure to cover it right here. Yes. So, all right, labels are very important, as was just said. So let's get to that. All right. So there's a couple of ways you can do things like texturing decals and things like that onto surfaces, and you can do it with a label or you can do it with a texture on a material, and I'll go over exactly why you would do either at certain times. So I'm going to pop open Photoshop here, and hopefully even if you don't have Photoshop, I hope you have access to at least one of the free editors like GIMP or some of those. All right, let's make a new file. So depending on the final output resolution of your render, you're going to want to give yourself some nice size labels. If you're going to render to 10,000 by whatever, you're going to want labels that can blow up to that size without looking pixelated. For this, I'll just do a 1024 by 1024 square. And what I'm going to do is make you know what, let's see if I can shutter dial, speed dial maybe. Let's see what I get. Yeah, so I basically want that. I'm not going to go through the process of making that all. Oh, perfect. Just work with this. That's a little res. Terrible. Yeah, I'll just throw some text on there and let you use that. So. Just use your imaginations here once I get this kind of set up. All right. So let's say that's our dial. Very off-round and not very impressive, but what I'm going to use this for is to show transparency and that kind of stuff, so the accuracy of it isn't too important. So what I want to do here is, depending on the effect that I want, you need to think about the file format and all of that. So let's take a look at some reference here that we already have. So we have, white on black. Let's take a look at what the like actually does. That is, of course, what I'm modeling after. So we'll just do a sort of a black and print. All right, so let's go ahead. I'm just going to rasterize my text here. I might as well just merge the layers as well, invert them, and now I get to worry about how I want to save this out. By far the easiest way to save these is just to do a PNG, and that's going to allow me to retain my transparent background without having to worry about alpha channels or even worry about any advanced settings in the dialog itself. Of course, JPEGs are very easy to use, but they don't have alpha channels or transparent backgrounds. So we don't use that for this. Let's call that dial. And you can see the options are very, very simple. Interlace, none, okay. Go to KeyShot, double click. This is its own surface. You can, well, the dial is its own body, as you can see. So we're going to be dealing with that on its own. So I'm going to just copy and paste that material back onto it. One navigation tip I have for you is Alt-Control right-click to refocus the camera on a given clicked point. So if I Alt-Control right-click onto my camera shutter button here, that becomes the center of my view. It allows me to rotate around that very nicely and easily. That's as opposed to having to manually pan the camera over to some new point to get it refocused. Of course, the long way of doing it is right-click, look at, and that does the same behavior. Another great new feature is right-click, look at object center, and that just centers my view on the object itself. So let's take a look here. All right. So if I first look at label, I'm going to click add, and I'm going to load in my dial.png. And now, a lot of the times when you load in a label, you don't automatically see it on the surface. And that just has to do with it's kind of mapped randomly at first. And the default projection method is normal projection, which means it's going to project from it's going to, meeting's complaining about something. Okay. And normal projection is going to project from the normal that you click on. So you enable position mode here, and then you click on a point on the surface, and it projects the graphic from that surface, no matter what that surface is. So if I project it onto the side here, where it has the surface is at an angle, let's just zoom in on that a little bit, you can see it's kind of wrapping around the surface. Let's click position, and as I click, I can actually hold down and click, and we see the effect it has of changing the projection as I go around that corner. And I can continue to go around the side here, and it's very automatic. What you'll notice is it's not, of course, actually, it's not magic, so it can't it can't kind of wrap around in a very good way. It does actually project from a planar, in a planar way, depending on the orientation of the surface. But it doesn't actually wrap around perfectly. So what you'll get is if you project from a plane and then you project onto a perpendicular plane, you'll see the result is not so good. You get that distortion there as it goes off on that plane. But it's easy enough with this one because we have this nice flat surface. We won't notice any issues. In fact, when you have a nice flat surface, you can use the planar mapping types, and you can continue to just click position. And they work basically the same, but you'll notice when I have that kind of projection, even if I click on the side, it doesn't change the orientation of the mapping. It's always coming from the same plane. I have my flip values if I need to call those into action. And I can just scale this up to fit the model a little bit. All right. So let's look at the way this would be rotated now. So if we're back here, we might want to rotate this with the angle value to maybe about like that. Might click position and just get it a little more centered here. Okay, so that's the easiest way to just drop a label on there. You just save it out to PNG that retains your background, and that's all you need to worry about. But now if we look closely, the one issue you get with PNG is you get a little bit of a fringe where the alpha is blended. Of course, if I'm looking from back here, it's not really a big deal. It works just fine. The solution to that is to use a TIFF with an actual alpha channel, because the actual alpha channel you can blend your TIFF with any color, so that fringe blend will actually match the color that you expect it to match. I have some example files that we can use for that, and I'll just load them on right here. Desktop here. Okay, so we have these different labels here. I'm just going to use this one first. We'll look at that. That's a PNG, and you see its gradient to transparent is pretty nice, actually. It works quite well. Now let's compare that to a TIFF, this TIFF here, the position. Now what I want to do to see the really see the difference here is make this a white, diffuse, not quite white. Okay, so now this gradient was saved out of Photoshop just like this. Just make this color here. I had a background filled like so, made a mask, and made a gradient in the mask. Something like that. And then I save this, save as, TIFF, disable that there, click save, and I can get this transparency very easily just by clicking save transparency. But just using save transparency gives me this weird dark blend, and that's not what I want. So between these two, PNG is obviously better. But I can actually use a proper alpha channel on a TIFF to get a very nice result. So if I look at this surface here, if I load this other TIFF, this one uses a proper alpha channel, and you see it gives a very nice result. Just in this case, it's as good as the PNG. So again, there's no real reason I would need to use the TIFF in this case. But as we can see with the text here, the PNG is actually blending a little bit with the wrong color. So if I really need to control that perfectly, I go to my graphic here. What I'm going to do is fill a background with black. I'm going to create a selection of my text here. I'm going to go to my channels and say new channel. I'm going to fill that with white. Go back up to the RGB here. Now I don't even need this layer because all I need to do is save as, do a TIFF, and now I'm letting an alpha channel tell the surface, tell the label what should and shouldn't be transparent. So let's call this style TIFF. Okay, so now when I save out this TIFF, I need to disable layers, leave alpha channels enabled, and click save. Now in this case, there is no save transparency because I actually don't have a transparent background. Click OK. So let's go ahead and load that in. Style TIFF. You can see there's a big size difference, of course, as well. 4 megabytes versus 10 kilobytes. All right, let's position that. Now, zoom in and observe. Hopefully I'm right. Yes, it's a little bit, you can see it's just a little bit cleaner on those edges. And that's because we told the alpha channel how to blend. Now, this is not going to be something you're going to need to do for every label. As you can see from some tiny amount of distance here, we don't see any real advantage to the TIFF. But I just wanted to show, for the ultimate in accuracy, a TIFF with a proper alpha channel gives you the most control. Now, let's take this same label idea here, and let's actually do an embossed or debossed effect. So I'm going to take this graphic. Now what I'm going to do is I have just this black, and I can load. Well, actually, before I get to that, sorry, I skipped ahead there a little bit. And Brian, are there any questions that need clarification on this label so far? Different material and assembly. Okay. Yeah, I'll cover the different components in an assembly material thing really quick. If you're using any of the solid modelers, SolidWorks, Solid Edge, those kinds of ones, basically all you have to do is within one assembly, it'll split apart in the scene tree all of your part files within that assembly, but within each part file, it'll give you automatically your bodies separated. But then beyond that, you have to actually apply unique colors. So if I have a SolidWorks file, let's take a look here. Just make that more of a square. All right, so let's say I have this cube. If I save this out and import it into KeyShot, all of those surfaces are going to be the same. All I need to do to make them separate is go to the color changer here, and I can make the face a different color. And now, if I save that out and bring it into KeyShot, all of these gray faces will be one part, and this one red face will be its own part. And that functionality is basically the same in any of the modeling packages out there. Some of the other ones like Rhino, you can split it up split your parts up into layers, and then say shade by layer, and that works for that. But it usually is some control of the colors or materials on the surfaces that dictates what's split up once it's in KeyShot. But so okay, continuing on from labels, there's another way to do the sort of labeling functionality, and that's to actually do it as a texture on the material. And the reason that might be a good idea is because the label itself is actually it does not take on the properties of the material. So if I look at these blue labels I have over here, if I make the underlying material a nice shiny metal, you see that those don't take on that shine. It's still they're completely diffuse. I can control them. For example, if I go onto this label, one of these labels here, I can add specular, so a specular highlight. And it would seem that's on this first one. And in fact, I can make that specular label even more shiny by increasing the IOR. And that gives me that shininess to the label. So in this case, that matches a little better. But it doesn't take on the properties of the material. So if this material is a little more advanced, had some roughness and such, it doesn't take on that property. That's a good thing a lot of times when you have a metal or a shiny material and you want a nice graphical label. But sometimes you want it the other way. You want it to look like it's kind of painted onto the surface and takes on that surface's properties. If that's the case, you need to do it as a texture. So I'm going to leave this on here, but I'm going to move it off to the side. And I'm going to load in the same graphic as a texture in the texture tab here. So double click, load that in, and by default this is being UV mapped, and it's not very good in this case. So what I want to do is do a planar Y. When doing this through a texture method, you lose the from normal projection, which is unfortunate. But so if you need that, you got to use label. But you have the planar mapping still, so it's not too bad. All right, so what you see is, of course, it's repeating the tiles of this texture. So you see as I scale this down, we get a lot of those little tiles. We don't want that. So all we have to do is turn off repeats here. Make sure that actually turns off. I can click position, and let's just line those up together. And now you can see there's a big difference between, now it's like the color of the metal on the surface changed where that texture is, rather than really blacking out the surface. It still takes on the shine. The great thing is, if I had a bump map on here, just this one here, for example, you see the label does not take on the bump map, but the texture method does. So sometimes that's exactly the result you want, rather than sort of these completely separate from the material in the way the label works. But both have their place, of course. Now, using this same kind of functionality, let's do something cool with our labels. I'm going to get rid of the bump map, and I'll just disable this texture for now as well. What I want to do is, using my bump map and texture, I'm going to actually emboss or deboss the letters into the surface here. So if I go to my Photoshop, I'm going to actually make my layer a smart object, and then I'm going to apply a blur And I made a smart object so that I can come back and adjust the blur if needed. Now the reason we need to make a blur on this is because when I load, what I'm going to do is load this new image into KeyShot as a bump map. And KeyShot automatically creates bump detail by looking at the black and white values of your surface. And if you have a perfectly sharp text file that goes from black to white in basically 1 pixel, it won't give you a nice transition. It'll just kind of cut the label or the dial graphic into the surface with a very harsh edge to it. It won't look softly embossed or pressed in. So what we do is give it a little blur to give it some slope on the edges of the graphics. So let's take a look at that. We're going to go into bump map, double click, load that in, and I did this as a PNG again, and the reason I want to do that is because I want it to I don't want to see let's see, oh, it's a bit weird there. Did I get the right one? Load it in as a PNG so that I get a transparency on the outsides of the surface so that it doesn't get a border around it. But it's not really showing up, is it? Maybe it's a little too transparent. Just duplicate the surfaces there. Try saving that out again. PNG. Maybe it shouldn't be completely black. Yeah, maybe we'll do white. Might give a better result here. I think that's probably what it is. So let's invert this. And let's do that by just going to rasterize, invert. All right, let's try that. All right, let's load that new one in. That's a little better. Just to confirm, let's make sure. So yeah, it doesn't like, so don't do that with black. Definitely wants the graph to be white. All right, so now that we have it on there, you can see, especially if I compared that to one with without blur, you get these nice soft edges that make it look sort of naturally part of the surface rather than just kind of popping straight out of it. And what's cool is I can actually bring in my my other graphic, so this one here, I can actually load that in as a texture, and it'll be like it's painted over just those parts. And the way I need to get that matched up. So what I do is go over to bump map, click sync, then just adjust the value one little bit, and then that'll sync up those textures so that they fall onto the same spot. And I get that color effect. Very nice. Okay, and then on the bump, I use the height to more or less get a increase or decrease the intensity of it. Go to a negative to change. So if I want to go from debossed to embossed or the inverse, I just have to switch which way this value is. If it's negative, it goes one way. Now it's not a given for what it's going to do on each model. Every model will be different. It might look embossed when it's positive value and debossed negative, but it might be the reverse. When I leave sync enabled, I can continue to click position. It will update both textures. Let's just get rid of repeat. There we go. Scale that up a bit. Change the angle. flip horizontally. There we go. All right. So that definitely covers labels and texturing. Yeah. Let's do a let's do a color here. What I might do is make here. I'll take a let's take just the 16, for example, and make that red. Just do a color overlay, or let's color overlay is a little bit bad. Let's try a colorize. If I can get that to work off of black. Very much. Yeah, good enough. So we'll save that out. Do again a PNG, and we'll call that style 2. Okay. So I'm going to load this new one with a color into my texture here. It goes right on there. Just get rid of this weird material I made there. All right. Now, one last little bonus trick before we end the meeting, or we'll go over some questions, of course. But the one last thing I want to show here is doing a nice radial groove pattern, the way you get sort of on old stereo equipment. Let's look up stereo dial. See if we can get something, sort of this effect here. So what I need for that is a finely grooved texture. I think I have one. Let me find that. My server here. Here. I had this texture, but oh, it must be in here. Oh yes. Okay. So I'll show you this one. Let me just copy that to the desktop. All right. So we'll definitely get these project files up on the forum soon. But if we look at this is a normal map that has very, very fine grooves. So what I'm going to do is use this to load in onto this surface. Double click. It's going to be a bump map. Double click. And now with any normal map, I have to make sure I enable normal map mode. And then I want to enable just planar Z probably for this. Now, a lot of times with normal maps, the height by default is too high, and you get this crazy black effect. So I'm just going to go to a really low value first here, 0.1 even, just so I can get things set up. 0.05 perhaps. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is just click position, and I'm going to click exactly. You can see if I click over here, we get kind of offset. It's actually pretty much perfect right where it was. So I'm just going to click kind of in the center there. And that's really all you have to do to get that effect, because that's the way it's done in real life, is there's just very fine grooves that are catching the light in that circular pattern. So let's let that sit for a sec. And the only thing I might do is decrease the roughness here. So maybe 0.05. And doing a very fine groove texture like that will take a little bit to render, so 2.01. Of course, it's also dependent on, let's try that there. Okay, so yeah, it's a nice subtle effect now, and that's what we're going for. Let that just render for a sec here. Okay, well that's while that's just rendering up a little bit, see if there's any questions Brian wants me to go over. Is there any way to tell what you're clicking on? Is there a setting to turn this option on? The only thing that we have that's, if you're in scene tree and you select a part, you actually get a part outline. So I don't know if that's kind of what you're looking for. If not, let us know, and we'll try to clarify some more. But there is a part outline, but of course it does go away right now when you change over to a different tab. I'm going to go ahead and just we'll just continue answering questions.